Hello and welcome to Talk of Today, where we explore developments in science, technology, and society, and what they could mean for the future. Today we are talking about a fascinating combination of topics: democracy, identity, crypto, and universal basic income. Joining me to help weave together these topics is serial entrepreneur and co-founder of the Democracy Earth Foundation, Herb Stevens. Democracy Earth is a non-profit building a blockchain-based open-source liquid democracy governance platform with the aim of bringing blockchain-based tools for democracy to the world at large. As a part of this mission, they've recently co-developed and launched an identity solution, purposefully, which they hope will empower people around the world with a cryptographically secure form of identity that can be used everywhere. Holders of this Proof of Humanity identity will also receive Universal Basic Income tokens, the idea being that everyone who is registered on purposefully will be streamed UBI tokens at a rate of 1 token per working hour, which, as of right now, equates to about $440 a month. Democracy Earth has been one of my favorite organizations working in the crypto world. Their intentions are to use this suite of promising new technologies to help reinvent democratic systems and ensure that people, no matter where they live, can prosper. I'm thrilled to have had the chance to speak with Herb about all of the great work they've been up to over the years, but particularly around their identity solution and the UBI token. I reached out to him about a day or two after the UBI token launched, with the hope of finding just a little bit more about it and to get some questions I had about it answered, and Herb did not disappoint. So just for some background on Herb, for the past 25 years, he has been a serial software entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, having built and sold multiple companies, mostly building systems where power purposely shifts to the user through technology. When he learned of blockchain technology in 2012, he considered it to be the best invention since the internet itself, and he then dedicated the rest of his career to social entrepreneurship. This led him to co-found the Democracy Earth Foundation, in which he is a treasurer at the moment. He is also executive director of the Independent National Union, a new organization with the aim of strengthening political power independent from the two-party system to enable the independent governing of American cities, states, and nation. In our conversation, we cover sovereign identity and proof of humanity ID, quadratic voting, currency, nation-states, and the blockchain revolution we will see over the coming decades, how the Universal Basic Income token works, what the philosophy behind it is, and what the plans for it are. And we spent a bit of time discussing what's wrong with politics in the US today. All of the links to the things that we have discussed can be found in the show notes, which you can find in the description below. And while you're there, please consider subscribing. Anyway, I was thrilled to finally get the opportunity to speak with Herb. The work Democracy Earth is doing is really an inspiration, and I have no doubt the world is already better off because of it. And without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Herb Stevens. Herb, it is very nice to be joined by you today. I was just wondering, so I've been following Democracy Earth for a few years now, and I'm very excited to see the recent developments with the UBI token and proof of humanity. But before we get into Democracy Earth, Universal Basic Income, I'd love to hear about your background and how. But what's been your trajectory over the years and how you actually came to help co-found Democracy Earth?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me on Talk of Today, Sam. I'm really happy to be here and represent Democracy Earth and the foundation. I'm a software nerd. I'm 55, been basically into software since junior high, so literally 40 years. Sort of the front half of that career is more corporate, working for GE and General Motors and some bigger corporations, but nonetheless in the technology side. In the last 25 years here in Silicon Valley, kind of as a co-founder or founder of a software company. Kind of gone through just about every cycle on the for-profit side, as far as we took one company public and we had another couple acquired. I've mainly been in 3 industries: financial services, healthcare, and now civic tech. But for the last 6 years now, going on 7, I've been with the Democracy Earth Foundation and focused on more of the nonprofit side of things and how we can use technology to improve society.
How did you make that transition from, I guess, your more general technology companies and for-profit companies to moving towards civic technology and trying to build what I guess you could conceive of as like social infrastructure in a way?
Yeah, very good question. I think it was a natural migration. First of all, just like we've seen software go from proprietary to open source, and I would argue that if it's not open source, I'd fear your future. That's just the general direction of things on that front. Uh, Also, just kind of the arc of my career, maybe one of the main takeaways I'd like to leave with your audience is, uh, I came to one conclusion after working in my career that sort of cut horizontally across these industries, and that was that ownership of the data or has to be in the hands of the user, right? And data can be a number of things, including your vote, your money, and a lot of assets. But in today's world, certainly the way the architecture of the internet is, it's really been upside down from the beginning. I was in banking networks before HTTP came along, before the internet came along, and it was very secure. And when it came along, it was like, wow, that architecture is totally upside down. And it's not until blockchains come along that fundamental architecture of the internet has changed such that you don't have to go through these redundant layers of authorizing users and having their data out fragmented across the internet. Now the keys to someone's power, money, data can be in their possession at all times, and that just doesn't exist today. It certainly hasn't existed since blockchain. So for me, the conclusion was in financial services, if you're really going to get better financial services, if you think about it today in your relationships out there in your financial services world, all your relationships are fragmented. The data's all over the place. How do any of those financial service companies give you good advice? They don't. If you're a financial service company, the only way you can give someone good advice if you really see a consolidated look of them, like a balance sheet and an income statement with all of their data in one place. And you can only do that if it's sort of in the hands and possessions of that user. So I would argue in financial services, you'd get better products, you'd get cheaper products, you'd get much better delivery mechanisms if the data were consolidated with the user. I worked in healthcare, the same conclusion in that industry. Right now, healthcare, are you kidding me? You walk in, you start with a blank form, at least here in the United States. And so, so the idea is like you get better healthcare, cheaper healthcare if the data is with the user. And the same conclusion is with your vote or voice. And those lines have really been blurred lately. The digitization of money, as well as Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, as far as voice equals money. And so what happens is the digital wallet becomes sort of the center of your ID as well as your keys, right, to all of these assets.
Yeah,
so so that
sorry,
art
continue.
got me to Democracy Earth Foundation in about 2015, when they became one of the first nonprofits backed by Sam Altman and Y Combinator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll come to Democracy Earth shortly. What you said made me think of something that I've never really thought of before, and that's that by providing people with ownership of their own data, it's actually tremendously more beneficial to the organizations out there who might want to benefit from that data, who might want to take that data and run some analysis on it and then provide services based on it. And as the user or as a citizen, I can choose whether or not to provide that to them. And given that it's all consolidated in one place, and that there can be an aggregation of potentially, millions or hundreds of millions of people, and people can get access to that through paying each citizen, a small fee or whatever, you actually get far better analytical outcomes. Like I think of the Large Hadron Collider, like CERN. They have to do a ridiculous number of experiments and they look at the numbers, and then they say, oh look, based on this small fraction, we can verify that the Higgs boson exists. And the same could be like applied to genetics, like trying to identify like at scale small at scale. The scale is necessary to identify those little things that might be consistent across everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And data analysis has come a long way in the last few years with computing power, the continued increase in computing power. And, more and more that data becomes more valuable, especially when it's interlinked. with other data. And I mean, just imagine if you walk into a healthcare provider and you have every drug you've ever taken, every procedure you've ever had, every appointment, everything in your possession, right? And you can share what you want without revealing any of your private data. So, it's a better world when everyone does have keys to their data.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you come to get involved with Democracy Earth? What was the like? How did it come to be? How did you meet Santi? Is it you and Santi who are the co-founders? Is that how
There
it
are
happened?
5 co-founders. It's a very international organization. I'm the only American on the team. The others are from Argentina and France and Brazil. And But I did meet them when they came here right after they were accepted to Y Combinator. I was close to them, and I decided to kind of work for free for a couple of years, just shadowing Santi and Pia. Pia gave an amazing TED talk in Rio, and it's kind of what kind of put Democracy OS, which was one of the first open source software initiatives that Santiago and Pia started in Argentina. When they started a political party, Santi wrote a book called Hacktivismo, kind of how to hack governments with software, and sort of that got the attention of Y Combinator and others. And it's sort of I had a really interesting conversation with Santi, and he was talking about votes, 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 and I kind of said, let's sort of blur that line a little bit and just think of votes as money, or votes as power, or votes as not just a token for a vote. And blockchains were kind of early then as well. So, we started talking about how Bitcoin and Ethereum would be used as public ledgers to secure the votes.
Yeah.
So I've been with them since.
So what's the general what does Democracy Earth exist for? What's its purpose?
Yeah, it's interesting. Democracy Earth is a nonprofit foundation here in California, and we're here to improve the democratic process, and we're essentially software hacktivists, and really the last customers that we thought we would have would be the United States of America, right? There's more than half the world lives under dictatorship, and they're fighting for democracy, and so most of what we would consider our customers were those dissidents that needed software to secure software that they could rely on, that wasn't controlled by a government entity that was corrupted. And that word corruption is an interesting one because before spreadsheets and databases, corruption was very hard to pinpoint around the world. Right. It was paper based, and it was like relationship based. And the wonderful thing about the digitization of just about everything is corruption has been digitized. You can actually find it in a spreadsheet or a database, and whoever has the keys or controls that switches ownership, switches the amount of votes, switches something. And that's the wonderful thing about blockchains is we're moving from a world where databases have 4 basic functions to a world where they have just 2 basic functions. Right. And databases, it's the acronym CRUD, create, read, update, and delete, right? That's the 4 basic things you can do with a database file: create one, read one, update one, or delete it. And as you move to blockchains, really the only difference is it's a database that you can't update or delete. You can only create or read, right? And that inherently provides audit trails, security, and everything else. We can start talking about a lot of things there, but that's you move the corruption from ledgers that are controlled by one to ledgers that everyone's looking at and reading and that are incorruptible. And it's simple as that. You kind of remove the corruption by moving the control of the databases from one person having the keys, or a party having the keys, or a corrupt group having the keys, out into the world where it can be governed in a more democratic way.
So what sort of if we were to take that idea and then to realize it with actual tangible software, what does that
Right.
look like?
Well, it looks like you walk in to register to vote today, and they give you a ballot, right? And you take that ballot and you basically mark it, and you give it back to them, right? And that's sort of a clunky paper-based system. There are some ways you can use paper for backup, but if you think of all the ways that can be corrupted, I mean, I was in Barcelona when the ballots were being like ripped away from the people and burned just a couple of years ago. So what it looks like is someone very similar to our proof of humanity ID is using a digital wallet, having the keys secure with them. They create a public key, and then they register that, let's say, with the local authority, just like they're registering to vote. And when they do that, the registering authority sends them the appropriate tokens rather than a voting ballot, right? And then they take those tokens and they send them to the appropriate address. This address for yes, this address for no, this address for this person, that address for the other person. And it starts to be accumulated on a public blockchain very securely. And it starts out with the same process you would today, in person, maybe fingerprints, maybe iris scan, but whatever process that government demands, that's what you go through, and you're issued your token. And so it physically looks like that, and you're using your phone, and it's very secure because the government is in control of issuing the tokens. They're in control of the verification process, and then they can see it in real time, and there's no cost of auditing, and everyone's watching the vote.
Yeah, okay. I'm just thinking about how much more efficient in a way that is compared to, getting tens of thousands of people to organize, to set up ballot boxes and to print these things, and then, have to count all of them. And rather than get a result straight away, wait, a few days, maybe a week or 2 weeks, and then you get the result. Whereas with this, it can be done pretty damn quickly. And you can do it in lots of different ways. It's just, I'm imagining like a drag and drop, like a vote, like an election, different parameters depending on the situations, and it's quite easy to deploy, and it just happens automatically rather than having to send people out with paper. I mean, paper is in my mind is just a relic of the past. My handwriting was terrible, and it's so bad now because I only have to write the only time I ever write is when I need to sign a form. I don't ever write in any other way. Anyway.
Yeah, I love paper. I love books still. Most of my readings digitally these days. But, I understand people's desire to have paper because they're so familiar with it. But, and in some combinations, a lot of jurisdictions will choose to have both. But I would say the foundational one should be on a public ledger, just like Bitcoin is on, where everybody can look at it. And everyone can audit it in real time. And there's, we want fair elections. We're not rooting for either side or a particular side, right? We want the corruption out. And we want everyone to be confident that their vote was counted and that the election is secure and free of corruption. And that goes around the world, right? Not just here in the United States.
So around election time, there's always this discussion of whether or not e-voting is safe, whether or not it's secure, can we trust it? And I've always thought that it probably can be, especially with blockchain technology. But every now and because I'm no expert, every now and again this discussion comes up, I go and read a blog post by someone who takes it down, and because I'm no expert, I'm actually not too sure. So what are your thoughts, and what's the position of Democracy Earth? Can this be safe, or at least safe as the existing models which we have?
So first of all, I genuinely understand the concerns with electronic voting. I don't trust today's electronic voting, right? And there's a very specific reason why I don't, and that's because very little of it is open source software. So right there is the very foundation which you have to start. Is this software that we're voting on open source? What does that mean? That means the code is out there in the public domain where every single line of code can be monitored and read. There's nothing hidden. There's nothing proprietary. There's no little, extra counter over here that's tapping in at the right moment. No. It's open source code. So, and unfortunately, most of the stuff out there that people would call electronic voting is proprietary. It is not open source. So right there, I would agree with everybody. What people say is electronic voting is not. Now, blockchain voting, absolutely. I mean, look at Bitcoin. Not once has that blockchain been corrupted, right? And look at Ethereum. I mean, example after example, we're getting more and more secure, more and more comfortable with it. And it's just literally as simple as moving these ledgers out there in the public domain and out from private hands and corruptible situations.
Yep. Yeah.
So that using blockchains, now we're secure, right? And we can talk about other types of backups and things.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how Democracy Earth or its tools were used in the US. From memory, it was in Colorado that vote was conducted through some software developed by Democracy Earth. Was it some quadratic voting thing?
Yes. We're collaborating with Glenn Weil and his team from Radical Exchange and Democracy Earth Foundation there with the Colorado legislature. They're kind of piloting, experimenting with quadratic voting. And so kind of where we're talking about the different forms of democracy that you can operate under, quadratic is one of them. Obviously, one person, one vote is the fundamental one. Plutocracy is kind of whoever has the most votes or money, gets to vote. And most companies operate that way. Whoever has the most shares wins, or whoever has the most money wins. And then, there's liquid democracy where it's more fluid. Your vote, you can give it to someone else, and it's more in the individual's control, different form of representation. And then there's quadratic voting where you're allocated a certain number of tokens that are representative of either a budget or representative in relation to other members. That whereby when you vote for something, you vote for it once, it costs you 1 token. If you vote for it twice, it costs you 4 tokens. If you vote for it 3 times, it costs you 9 tokens. So it's kind of like if you really want to put all your chips in one, you're not able to influence it with a large amount of money because the quadratic cost of it increases so much that you can't take over with your power, right? But it is a good if someone's willing to pay more and more and more for a vote, it shows how strong they are on that position. So it's a way of really signaling. Whereas a lot of legislation is just yes or no. Well, how do you vote? Yes or no? And you're not able to signal with, I'm put all my chips on this, forget about these other issues. Right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm excited to get my hands on, or at least to start using some of this stuff in my own life, but ideally in my own country, in Australia, because we think of ourselves as fairly democratic and forward thinking and all that. But I think we've actually slipped in the democracy ratings over the past few years.
I think a lot of people have, including the United States, and I like a lot of the things that
you had Trump, so it's kind of understandable, like at least you've got that excuse in a way.
That's true. That is true. That's true.
So I know we kind of touched on, we explored identity, and I guess what you were describing is sovereign identity. Is there anything that you would add to what we spoke about briefly there, like that sovereign, like what, like if you were to, if I missed anything, what is sovereign identity, and why is it so critical? Not just from a personal standpoint, or why is it so critical in a digital democracy, in a globalized world, in a world where we are so connected and our lives are influenced by data so much?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we're not the first here at Democracy Earth to be talking about sovereign identity, and for a long time now, decades really, it's kind of not this holy grail, but it's kind of like this pot at the end of the rainbow. I kind of view it as it's kind of glorious and it's nice to think about, but a lot of the conclusions that I've come to, and maybe Democracy Earth and the way we implemented kind of our first app out there, is there is no such thing as sovereign identity, right? Your ID only matters once you're connected to something else, right? And that's membership. And that's so your sovereignty goes away, right? When you agree to certain conditions or governance in this two-party system. Otherwise, you're just floating and not connected to any economy or communications or anything else. So that notion of sovereign ID is not existent. So what you default to is certainly in a blockchain world with digital wallets is if you have a token, you're a member, right? So if you have Bitcoin, you're a member of the Bitcoin club. There's only 21 million of them, and you're a member of that. Now, membership is just pay the market price. That's entry into membership. Getting a voting token, as it described earlier, might be, no, you got to come, show up in person, give a thumbprint, iris scan, et cetera, personal information. Then you get this token, and you're a member, right, of this community. So, ID just becomes the process of getting that token or membership in that DAO or distributed organization, and then the governance of that membership that exists if you get kicked out or if you can continue, how you continue. So that really becomes identity in sort of our world. So when we launched democracy.earth as kind of an app, essentially when you went there, it looked like a crypto fed Twitter, right? And it's really like whatever's in your wallet, you can participate in that conversation. So if you have Ethereum, any conversation posted or with Ethereum, you're a member of that community. Any other token out there, it's in your wallet, you're a member and can participate without Democracy Earth playing the middleman.
Yep. Is that like the early adoption strategy to try to facilitate governance within blockchain communities?
Yes, we kind of said, here are the different types of democracy you can utilize. Your existing token, you can spin up a new one. You can use the Democracy Earth token. So you have all these different choices on which tokens. We were working with some technology providers on, their site, democracy.earth, and then we would allocate them tokens, and then they would distribute them. So they would conduct their own democracy and essentially voting on how much money was distributed to app developers. So they were voting on who had the best app, and then the money was literally distributed right to their wallets based on really about 100,000 a month. So like using it in methods like that, like real-time distribution of money.
Yeah, okay. I just stifled a sneeze. So it might come back. It might come back. So we'll see. So I know that like identity is critical to all of this, and when people today when I verify who I am, I need to provide personal information and a password, but it might be my date of birth, an email, my address, a secret password, not a secret password, a hint. I need a hint for my answer to my secret question. So I've got this bank of secret questions, but this technology enables us to verify identity without the transferal of any personal information. So I can preserve my privacy, but still verify that I am who I say that I am, and then I meet the certain requirements. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And again, the magic happens through the digital wallet, through PKI or public key infrastructure, and elliptical curve cryptography go in one way. But yeah, that's it, is that you are the only one that have the keys to this. Now, with the latest protocol that we just launched, proofofhumanity.id with Claros, that's a simple identification protocol that sort of looks at just, are you human, right? And just asks that simple question. And what's the basic couple of principles? What's the most simple way in which we can use blockchains to sort of facilitate that? And that's with Ethereum. That's showing your unique address that you as a human created, presenting a picture and a video, and then just whatever name you choose to give. Now, it's super simple, and then it's just used gamification and others to verify and root out bad actors, duplicates or symbols. And, that's sort of got back to sort of, uh, the basics of a number of things we wanted to do, including issuing universal basic income. But with that ID, then once you prove that, and you have to be vouched for by a registered user, just with those simple checks, the network's going to grow from there. And then you can start accruing UBI.
Yeah. So is proof of humanity, is the intention for it to be some form of blockchain based ID? So could I prove, is there an intention for me to use that? Like if I've established I am who I say I am, could I potentially use that to log into a particular service or to do a whole range of things? Is that one of the intentions?
Yes, absolutely. We built it as a baseline ID layer. Again, issuing a baseline universal basic income, and then the ability to sort of track your time or sell your non-UBI time. But we'll get to that later. But yes, absolutely. We already have a couple of partners we're talking to that would do just that and use that proof of humanity .id and the Claris judicial system, as the baseline ID. And a couple of things that we realized early on is that we needed a couple of things for democracy. One is that in order to have a legitimate vote or legitimate democracy, you have to have a legitimate organization, right? And so you have to kind of start there. And so there's a lot of talk about DAOs or distributed autonomous organizations, and those are built on blockchains. And that's where you get your legitimate organization, right? And now you can build voting on top of that, or currencies. And
So there
so,
needs to be this structure within which voting and within which transactions take place. It can't just be
yeah,
out in the open. It needs to
and
have
literally
this form.
early on, it was on our roadmap. We need to bring distributed organizations, and we started to talk to Aragon and a few others really early on and help them out with their white paper, so we could cross it off our product roadmap, and someone else could do distributed autonomous organizations, so we could really focus on the functionality within democracy and in that process, right, and governance of that distributed organization. So they really built great infrastructure over there. Others have as well since then, but I think Aragon's one of the leaders out there in that area. And then you needed a judicial system. So if you think away the way these companies here in the United States organize, most of them are Delaware C corporations, and then you end up in Delaware court if there's a problem or question or something that needs to get resolved. And so when you start an organization, you have to have that same thing, blockchain based online and gamified in the right way to replicate what otherwise the state of Delaware would do, right? Provide that judicial layer when someone member of the organization says, hey, wait a minute, I have a dispute. And then, other people have to get involved.
Yeah. Kind of sounds a bit ridiculous when you need to potentially fly to Delaware to get something sorted out. I mean, there are people who start companies. I think, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can start I don't remember what the acronym is, but you can start a Delaware-based company, right? I think it's for tax reasons. Is that right?
There's a lot of different reasons, not really tax. It's mostly legal. They have the most favorable corporate law in Delaware, and most of the lawyers in the country that operate to corporate law are registered in Delaware or their home state and their home state. Certainly, if you're going after venture funding here in Silicon Valley, you must be a Delaware C corporation. Period. End of story. You won't get funded unless you're a Delaware C corporation.
Yeah. Okay.
Now there are other havens now. Most blockchain companies, certainly in the last number of years, they've left the United States. But if there are any left, they're in Wyoming. And that's the state that really is understanding what they're doing and has reasonable blockchain regulations.
Yeah. Okay. I'm surprised to hear that phrase, blockchain regulations, because I feel like they don't really exist in many ways or in many places. It doesn't seem like it at all. Perhaps some countries are. In Australia, where I'm based, they're moving slowly in that front. Like they've, basically, there's the capital gains thing. If you cash out, then you got to pay your tax. But aside from that, I don't really know what the details are.
Yeah, unfortunately, uh, we at Democracy Earth Foundation, we see that's where the friction exists is nation state, right? The world's operating on one internet, commerce is global, and countries and their regulations are trying to control something they can't control, tax something that they can't really tax very well, and they're kind of feeling pretty panicky. So you have reactions like China and India just ban it outright, and as soon as they do that, everyone demands it more, right? In the United States, they've tried to tax it in different ways or they talk about shutting things down, and the community laughs. And every time you go to Washington, you don't walk away thinking that they really get, what's needed. And so you have to go back to the state level. And that's typically how it works in the States is enough states get it and build a majority. And then the feds come along and say, okay, seems like a majority of the states are doing this. So we got to come along too, you know. And that seems to be happening with blockchains.
I see. This is something perhaps we can get to later on in the conversation after we talk about UBI, but I do see, I can understand the hesitancy with adopting these things because I feel like distributed ledger technology marks the end of the nation state. Well, so does the internet, but I think that we will see the dissolution of the nation state as it currently exists today. And the actions that these countries take to try to quell it will effectively be the death throes. Because, like, short of destroying the internet and making it so that no one can access it, I don't really know how you shut these things down. And people are going to do what people want to do.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on that. People are, and they shouldn't resist, but they will, and they are. But I kind of take, I think, a slightly different approach to that. And I think they're going to exist in harmony. I think, first of all, that almost every single nation state, first of all, yes, they're absolutely going to digitize their currency on blockchains. No doubt about it. So, and that's just inevitable, partly because China is now about to do so, and that's going to force the rest of the world to. The U.S. should have been ahead of that. Other countries are ahead of that. But eventually, yes, every country has their currency on a blockchain, which is simple. They're just moving it from, again, a ledger that has the keys one place to a ledger that has the keys somewhere else. Nothing's really changing, right? But now it's digital, and now it can move very, very quickly. And we'll see how it performs out in the open market. I'm not very bullish on the U.S. dollar if you look at it relative to Bitcoin and others. And the policy and how much money they've printed in the last
There's like another 3 trillion coming. I think there's another announcement about a stimulus.
I studied finance in college, and it scares me when I hear how much money's been printed, and there doesn't seem to be any consequences. But thinking about that, it's partly because it shows that the world does need a global currency. Because when we print so many here in the US, the world seems to absorb them because that's the global currency. So it's sort of relative to global, not just what's going on here in the US, but it forces every other country to keep up relative to inflation to print the same relative amount relative to their currency. And if you're not keeping up, you just get left behind, right? And those countries aren't that sophisticated and they can't keep up and they do get left behind. And so what you end up with is currency as discrimination, currency as bullies, currency as why should one nation's currency be the world's currency? And so what I see is all of them continuing to exist because if you really look at US dollars, they're not created for people. They're created through a commercial process. Dollars in the United States are created through the federal loan system, where a commercial bank will loan money to a commercial client, and that commercial bank borrows money from the Fed, and literally that money is created on the balance sheet of the Fed, and that's how money is injected into society and created, and then it's sort of a trickle-down effect, right? Now, that's needed, and the throttles that they put on that are relative to the measurements of markets, New York Stock Exchange and others, like, okay, it's getting hot, let's throttle it down. And I would argue that's always going to be needed and necessary. What we don't have, what's necessary, is the missing layer of currency, right? A global currency, one that scales with humanity, with the people. And it's not trickled down through business and that activity, which generally does scale with populations, more people, more commerce, but not necessarily.
Hmm.
Plus, I would kind of quote and credit Ray Kurzweil with this idea that by 2050, roughly 30 years from now, none of us will have to work. It's one of the arguments for universal basic income. I look at it kind of in a number of different ways, but essentially, if you think about that, if none of us have to work in 30 years, not too long from now, hopefully I'll be still alive then. None of us will have to work. That means that if that's true, if Ray Kurzweil, one of the best futurists on the planet, is correct, we have to be distributing enough out to people, if they're not working, to at least pay for the basics, right? And, they can work and do stuff on top of that. If you say you don't have to work, well, at least we have to signal with something. So this is sort of part of the impetus of the need for liquidity. And while machines and computers continue to eat up jobs at first at the low level and higher, to the point where no one has to work, we have to somehow be giving tokens or something to people to be signaling. Today it's currency, right? And that's our signal of choice, right? We signal with our dollars. I want that. That creates the demand, right? And with the money being created at the top, at the supply side, you're not getting proper signaling. So it's also a way in which to inject money into a system in which you get now proper signaling.
So when you say injecting from the bottom, I'm curious. This might be a good. Are we talking about? Are we talking about the universal basic income coin? Does this connect directly with this conversation, or is it somewhat separate? Because if it's connected, I think we can weave them together.
Yes, absolutely. That's the way we distribute universal basic income directly to people when they prove their humanity.
Okay, cool. So we'll get into the coin specific soon. But when you say it gets injected from the bottom up, is there like is there some rules, some protocol, some smart contract that gets executed depending on the number of people that are participants in the network, the level of activity, what they're spending their money on? Like, how is this bottom up injection of, let's just say, cash or tokens generated, and what would be the variables that are taken into account for this this change, this flux?
Yeah. So with universal basic income, there are a couple of founding principles you have to keep in mind. One is universal, and the other's basic. The two words in there. But to delve deeper, and I would credit Professor Guy Standing. Professor Guy Standing is the head of BN, which is the global organization that's been working on behalf of getting universal basic income out to the world for 30, 40, 50 years. He's written a number of books, done a lot of projects in India and other locations. And I've read all of his books, and the main takeaways that he, just to sum up his work, is one, universal means it goes out to everybody. There's no means testing. There's no, it goes to the poor, but not the rich. It goes to this class. It's not reparations. It's just universal. Every single person, every human on earth, regardless of what country you live on, where you are, what economic class you are, you get universal basic income just like everybody else. Now, if you're rich and don't need it, you'll end up giving it away or putting it into something else. But the basic principle there is that it's universal. So what that means is like there's no mean testing, and it goes out to everybody, and it's not in US dollars. It's not in a particular country. It goes out to everyone. So that was one of the founding principles of the Democracy Earth Foundation, and as we got more into releasing the token. And then on the other side of it, when it, relative to basic, it had to be enough relative to working time to represent what basic is. So you kind of had to look at real world numbers at basic, minimum wages and costs of things. And we started to talk more about time of the day and how blockchains are good clocks. And so we ended up creating the basis of the token itself in time, which we can talk about how that, creates a stable coin or stable pricing and sort of disconnects it from fiat currencies and other tokens that otherwise would, in our opinion, corrupt the nature of stability. So I would argue that anything they call out there as a stable coin that's connected to the US dollar, I don't know how they're putting stable.
What happens when the US dollar starts doing this?
What happens with the US dollar? Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's stable relative to that decline. Yeah, it's stably going down right with it, right? So we had
this way.
Yeah, just tilted. It's totally stable. You're sliding really fast, but very stably. So yeah, we had a lot of interesting conversations with very smart people about how we could do that, utilize blockchains. And again, what we got back to was the notion that the universal basic income had to be enough to cover the basics, and that meant it had to sort of represent a certain portion of working time, eventually getting to 8 hours a day 30 years from now. So you had to have a governance system by which you could ratchet up that universal basic income every year relative to what's going on dynamic.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because I haven't done a huge amount of research into basic income, but I haven't really heard this mention of time. Like the way I've always interpreted basic is that which is sufficient to participate in society at an acceptable level, right? Because we could say that what do human needs for basic survival? It could be adequate nutrition, water, shelter. That's the very that might be like the 18th century take, right? But today we need we need clothes, we need electricity. We also need, I would argue, internet access and personal device ownership. That's a paper I wrote a few years back at uni. Just look, to be a 21st century citizen, you need to own your own device, your own portal to the digital world.
Everyone should absolutely agree.
Yeah,
100%.
So I saw that as pegged to some monetary value, right? And I guess the time thing kind of it is, but it's how much time do you need to work sufficient to generate that value to survive, or to not to survive, but to satisfy the requirements, the basic requirements, and that could be a whole host of things that I don't know how economists worry about how you calculate that basket of goods. That's not me. But is that the general idea? Is that the mapping?
Yes, and I would add some more. I would add that if you think about society kind of as a man-made system, right? This money is made up, the titles are made up, the economics are made up, everything's made up. And in computing, you know that you can't account for everything when you build a system. And eventually you kind of have to unplug it and reset it, right? And it plays itself out, and it goes for a while, and then things start to go, and you're like, okay, reset, right? And you get back to. And I would argue that if you think about kind of capitalism and the global infrastructure that's been built now over a number of generations, and you think about the commons, and you think about how that wealth is handed down privately often, and in private ways, and through private islands and other ways. And you think about how maybe those dividends of our ancestors might not be being distributed properly, right? And so that's one element where when you're born and you come into society, in order to function, just like any game like Monopoly, you have to be given sort of a lump sum, like, here you go, we've built this whole system here. In order to participate, here's a bunch of money, and you're going to get a little bit every year. Now, you can just use that, or you can build something, go at it. And again, if you're going to restart a Monopoly game, you do just that. You say, okay, everybody, put the money back in, or start with a new currency. Let's reset all the titles, which means the debt and everything's relieved, not just student debt, but all debt, because that's all connected. So essentially, you're resetting money, work, which are the hotels in Monopoly, and homes, which are the green buildings, right? And these are the major assets in life that when you have a system like this, if we look at how things have accrued, just like in Monopoly, it's all accrued to one player and everyone else is bankrupt. It's accrued to the 1% and everyone else. It's played out just like that. And I would argue that what we need to do is not argue about it, not change the rules, just reset the game. Congratulate the winners, say, okay, congratulations, billionaires, you won this round. And then welcome new players to the table. Because I tell you what, if I were a player and I stepped up and saw how the game is rigged, I wouldn't participate. I'd be playing a side game over here, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of
the image, you join the game after 30 rounds, and there's hotels on every
all on boardwalk,
and the people who own those hotels, they have access to the bank. They are the bank.
Of course they
well.
do. They are the bank. Right? Oh, you want to borrow some money to play one round until you get killed? Sure. And that's what society's faced right now. So I kind of look at it in a neutral way. I kind of look at it from both sides. I think everyone's played the game. Some of it's luck and some of it's strategy. We lap around. And I think that now it's time for a reset. And so I think that's kind of like one of my worldviews.
Yeah, that aligns very well with mine. So I've been learning a lot about, I'm studying philosophy, and I've learned a lot about complex systems, and I guess just the nature of the way the world works, right? And a fundamental feature of the world is the Pareto distribution. We see it in all sorts of places. So like the fact that 20% of the 80% of outcomes can be sort of derived from 80% of the inputs, right? So like a minority of actions can result in majority of the outcomes. And this is true not just in economies with distributions of wealth, but also in the number of like the artists on Spotify who are the most popular, those that are the most listened to. There's like 1% account for like 95% of the players or something like that. And this is not indicative of like the general idea is inequality is built into the fabric of nature itself, right? Like the fact that people are choosing to stream this stuff, like this is an expression of personal interest, and these inequalities arise is indicative of that fact. But it's also the way rivers form. It's also the size of animals and their populations in relation to one another. This general theme can be wrapped up into this thing called the constructor law of thermodynamics, which is sort of like a basic physics principle that kind of helps explain how these inequalities come to be. But just because inequality is a fact of nature doesn't mean that we need to accept it and say, well, that's the way the world works. We got to deal with it, because people who make lots of money, they are born lucky. They're born into the they're not always born lucky, but luck plays a tremendous role in the generation of wealth. There was an article from MIT a few years ago that says, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Or something to that effect. And it just explains like the role that luck plays. So when you see all these things coming together and you see that some people have tremendous amounts of wealth, well, it's like, oh, well, like that wealth was made possible because of the, like your ancestors, like you are a part of a chain that extends back tens of thousands of years. The words and the tools that you use were not forged by your ideas. Like, I don't know how much credit we can take for our own ideas. And, society is there, right? So when you wrap all that up, it's like, look, thank you for creating the value. You've got $1 billion, you got $100 billion. Like, we appreciate your help. Maybe you can keep 50% of it because we can't justify you keeping all of that. So we'll take the rest of it and then distribute it back. And, the fruits of that labor, they nourish the ground upon which new value gets generated.
Yeah. And you know what? I would argue for solutions that don't focus around taking anything back or taxing. I think that's impossible. And I think I want to say wrong. I would create new layers of currency in which you operate with and new organizations in which you operate with, right? So I would literally set a date in the future when we sort of reset stock ownership. So when I look at blockchains, I see cap tables, right? It's the exact same thing where columns are time and rows are transactions or individuals or shareholders. And so, what we're going to have is a huge movement away from ownership being out in these private channels through venture capitalists onto private markets, like New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, inaccessible to the global market, and transitioning to ownership of your work, of your enterprise, right in your wallet, where when profits are distributed, your work is sold, rights are sold, it's coming directly to you, right to your wallet, not through some lawyer, not through an organization, not through some place where you have to, fight to get your share of your own work. So I see it. This is one of the biggest sort of transitions I see happening in the next number of years is moving from the ownership of people's work right to their wallets and from private exchanges out into distributed public exchanges.
So I'm not sure if I understand completely, particularly when you say reset. So
Yeah.
if could we like work through an example, just so I can
Yeah.
get a better
Yeah.
understanding?
Yeah. For example, there's a lot of trends towards co-ops. There's a lot of trends towards ownership, individual. Again, when I think of, the rights of people being trampled, I think, one of the questions I ask just about everyone I encounter is, do you own a fair amount of your work? Now, I purposefully phrased it that way so they would, first of all, define what a fair share is. Second of all, what they consider work, right? And you'd be surprised, almost everybody, the answer is no. I don't own a fair amount of my work, right? And, if you think about the world and, essentially you're exchanging your time for money, or you're and working within an organization, not enough of the rewards of those organizations are going to the employees, right? To the people that are actually doing the work. And instead, the monopoly game has gotten to the point where, again, the ownership in work and the hotels and the houses, too much of it are with the institutions and not enough with the people. So when I say reset, more and more it's happening at the lower level. It could happen more at a global level if there were a big enough movement. But if I were king, I would set a date like January 1st, 2025, and says, as of that date, every organization has to be at least owned 50% by the employees. Now, what's interesting about that is that's what a stock split is. So technically, it could happen across every exchange on the world with a push of a button, stock split, and half the shares go directly to people's wallets, right? There's no technical barrier. It would just have to be a shareholder vote, employee vote. So it could happen like realistically, tomorrow. Again, it would take a movement and things like that. But, that's the sort of thing that is happening and will continue to happen. And, less and less will, corporations be able to keep the power amongst a few and hide sort of the transactions that occur. Because again, and I spent a few years as an auditor with GE Capital, and that all the dead bodies are buried between the end of the month and the close of the books, right? And that lag is where everything goes into miscellaneous, is categorized in the accounts that make you look better and things like that. And with blockchains, you're going to have more and more instantaneous accounting, and therefore instantaneous accountability and tracing right to individuals, right? I would say that there's a lot of corporate sort of washing going out there, where corporations do things, they pollute a river, but no one goes to jail, right? And more this is going to be instantaneous accounting, which means if you have accounting, you have accountability. So, I see a world moving that way.
Okay. So let's jump back to basic income, kind of explore what the general plan is for proof of humanity, democracy, Earth, the UBI token. What is it? How does it work? How does the what is it? How does it work? And we can come to the how we maintain the price across time and all that. How do we keep it stable? But what's the general idea?
Yeah, the general idea is you go to proofofhumanity.id, and there you're going to be logging in with an Ethereum wallet, typically MetaMask. And in doing so, you're going to be registering an Ethereum wallet public ID number, address, and you're going to be submitting a picture and a video that has you showing that Ethereum address in a video, and you stating, I'm human and I haven't submitted to this registry before, and this is my Ethereum address. So that simple short video combined with the picture, combined with the registration process of that through the digital wallet on the blockchain, then starts a process where someone needs to vouch for you. So you've registered, and now you need a registered member to vouch for you, and they sort of do so through their digital wallet. So now you're vouched for. And then a 3.5 day period starts where anyone can challenge that vouch. If they don't, now you're registered and you start getting UBI literally directly to your Ethereum or digital wallet.
And how is the amount of UBI that's delivered to the person determined? And I'm sure it doesn't matter who you are, how much UBI you might have bought, you get the same amount?
Yes, exactly. So the key there is having a consistent drip rate, and the drip rate is actually per second. And when you have that consistency, that equates to universal. Everyone gets the same. There's no, but through the governance process, it could be throttled up or throttled down. And over a period of time, once we see the market dynamics out there and how it literally, one of the goals is really to put a value on time out there. The notion that you receive this at a certain rate and you can also earn it at a market rate. We want, rather than a one-to-one relationship determining how much someone's worth, we would like that value determined out there on public markets, such that I'm not going to get rid of my UBI tokens that I'm accruing for anything less than I would sell my time for, right? And and if you're a salaried employee, that's going to pull the number higher. And if you're an hourly employee somewhere, it might pull it down. But if you think globally, between all the people in the world receiving it, you're going to have millionaires that, I'm not going to sell my UBI for less than something. So it creates a natural market for the time that you get. And again, the two limiting factors, every token, and so it just doesn't run away inflation, has to have a couple limiting factors. And this is population or proof of humanity, and then time. There's only so many hours in a day. So we've throttled it such that you can't have more than there's time in a day. And it represents a percentage of working hours. In this case, we started literally with 23% of 8 hours, or almost a quarter of a working day is sort of the rate that it's stripped to you. Now it'll equalize over time, and we'll see where that plays out. But
Okay, so these coins, like the nature of digital anything is that it's like technically, nearly infinitely divisible, right? So it
yes,
could be one UBI token, but I could have 0.0001 coming to me every second. So what's the and so you're saying the market value of UBI, the value of UBI will be determined by the market, but what's the drip rate? So what I don't understand is, you said 23% of an 8 hour day or something like that. What does that equal in terms of the UBI token?
yeah. So one thing to keep in mind is that we started the drip rate at a rate that is, again, universal and very easy to understand, and that's essentially 1 UBI per hour. Okay, which is a fraction at a drip rate of per second. I don't know the fraction off the top of my head, but it equates to getting 1 per hour. Now, obviously blockchains continuously go, but working hours are spread, the 8 hours are spread out across 24 hours. So you have to have a rate that sort of equates to as if it were a percentage of 8 hours, right? And if you think about 8 hours being the working time, 8 hours, 5 days a week, that's 2,000 roughly hours a year, right? And, so you have about 8,700 hours in a year. So that's a percentage of the total hours. And so blockchains are constantly going. So you have to relate it to working hours, which are in relation to total hours. And then you get sort of your drip rate. And we started out to make it super simple and not just some fraction. You get 1 per hour.
Yeah.
Right. And then the market will then determine, relative to the value of time, what that is. Okay. But the goal is to do a percentage of working time and then bump that up over time. And then through a DAO or governance, adjust that over time as the market dynamics change, right?
Okay.
And whenever you issue a token, one of the things you realize is that early on, you have a lot of speculation. You have people thinking, oh, this is going to go to the moon, let's pump it up. And then you have people selling, and all this craziness goes on, and you kind of like, it's beyond your hands in the distributed world.
Didn't it get to $150 per token?
Yeah, it did.
That's what I bought. Because I didn't know what the hell was going on. I'm like, oh, Santi's released this thing. I'll support it. Here's some Ethereum. I didn't. It was the first time I'd used Uniswap. So I didn't know how to check the price or whatever. I'm like, oh well, here we go. It seems pretty early. I didn't realize that I bought it at Mount Everest, but that's okay. I believe in the. I believe.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's Mount Everest until time goes by and they realize how early they were, and so we'll see where it shakes out. But you have a real choice when you're issuing a token, and that's the Bitcoin model, which is fixed quantity and increasing price, right? And so that increases the value as you multiply the two. Or you can go kind of stable pricing or fixed pricing and sort of increasing quantity or goes up and down relative to population. So obviously the UBI token is the latter, which we issued at a relatively low price, and we expect it to trade up and stabilize where people value time.
Yeah. So how can I sell my UBI? Like if I'm getting a UBI an hour, how do I turn that into pizza at my door?
Yeah. So the wonderful thing is, and again, the transaction costs, unfortunately vary wildly early. Right now, the transaction costs are lower on Ethereum, but just days ago or weeks ago, they're much higher. And, that's a factor of demand and a number of things. But the good news is that more and more decentralized exchanges are taking care of that in the background, right? So when you go to buy your product or you buy your pizza or you buy whatever you want, it sort of takes what's in your wallet, looks across multiple oracles and exchanges, picks the right one, converts it into the currency that whoever that vendor is selling in, and happens behind the scenes. So it's going to pick your best currency at the best rate, at the best exchange all around the world, right? And you're just saying buy pizza and you don't even know what's going on in the background.
Yeah.
So that's the world we're getting to. But yeah, right now, that vendor has to take what we have, or you might have to swap from UBI to Ethereum or some more common used token at this point. Certainly the goal is to also help determine the price and enable people to sell their time and keep track of their time, which isn't done today on any blockchain, which means that for the non-UBI time, the rest of the day, if someone takes or buys a UBI out in the open market and sends it to you, that's the equivalent of buying your time, right? And now you can see that on the blockchain. Or they send you the equivalent and it's sort of minted in your wallet, which means it's staked with real currency or value, valued on an open market, and that mints an hour or a UBI token. They kind of go hand in hand, and sort of now you have a lot of people don't have that sort of audit trail, and both sides want it. That hey, I purchased an hour of your time, and you owe me an hour of your time, and I paid you a fair price. And now you have sort of an online contract just through a simple transaction.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can decide to value my time at however I wish to, or depending on how I'm feeling. Because I could say, like if someone was, I guess I choose to engage in that transaction if I want to.
Well, this is an interesting concept that I'd love your listeners and your feedback to on this and to really understand. One of the fundamental principles that we operate to is that everyone's time is created equal, right? And I know that a lot of the world doesn't operate that way, right? I'm a lawyer and I went to this school and, I bill at this hour and my time is worth this much. And, you're a janitor and your time's not worth much at all. Well, I think we all need to step back and realize and start from a place where actually, no, everyone's time is created equal. What is not created equal is what you can do with that time, right? Yes, as a lawyer, maybe you have an education and contacts and you can get this project done or contract done within half an hour, and wow, I'll pay you $10,000 to do that, right? So your time is not, it's not a matter of connecting your value to time. And again, this is where I and a lot of us see fundamentals of discrimination around the world. The ability for me to pay a man here in the United States $750 an hour and let's say a woman in India $2 an hour, right? And valuing literally their time that differently. And that's a fundamental thing here that we're trying to say, no, it doesn't mean that we're going to all earn the same amount. Not at all. We just have to have a different conversation and base it on, yeah, that lawyer can still earn millions of dollars a year, but it's not because their time is that valuable. It's because they're delivering the things that are of that value, right? And that goes for anyone on the planet.
That's the separation.
Yeah, exactly.
The time is the same, but it's what's delivered in that time frame that has value. It's not the time itself.
Precisely,
Gotcha.
right?
Gotcha.
Precisely. So someone could sell $10 million worth of something and earn 10% of that, get $1 million in 20 minutes because they have contacts and they can sell and whatever, right? So it doesn't limit anything. It just says, wait a minute here. Much of the world operates on I'm trading my time for a currency, right? And our co-founders are from Argentina. They've been through enough collapses of currency and cycles that they understand, like, you know, that's fundamentally wrong when you're trading your time and then tomorrow it could be worth half as much, right? So we have to be thinking of the currency literally that we're trading our time for in time itself. So there's no inflation and deflation. So if I'm trading my hour for an hour today, tomorrow it's worth an hour, next year it's worth an hour, and the year after that it's worth an hour. It never inflates or deflates. You with me?
Yeah, yeah. But
right.
It would relative to other currencies that you would exchange it for, of course.
Sure, of course, right? But that's relative to other currencies. But on an open market, time is 1 hour is 1 hour, right? And sure, it may be worth more or less somewhere else, but on a global open market, it would kind of become, ideally, hopefully, the de facto global minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
No one's going to trade their time for less than that, but you can certainly earn more than that. And any employer can like buy more time. But the key is that only time can be created by humans spending time on Earth, right? And that's the measurement, that's the protocol, and only humans can generate it. And sure, now it's liquid. I could sell that free UBI, or I can trade my time on an open market for whatever the world is valuing time.
Yeah. So
now, what's interesting is now what's connected, how that's connected is that if you think of Bitcoin as a store of value at a certain level, right, which we you know, UBI is and our token is, but at the lower level, the functionality is signaling. The functionality is democracy. The functionality is Satoshi level. I'm sending a little bit here, and there's voting protocols connected with the currency. So literally, I'm giving you my 2 cents. I'm sending it from here to there because I vote that way, and I can signal without it leaving my wallet, if you will. Right,
yeah,
and we can have always on democracy rather than getting a token like once every 4 years or year or two. I can have a presidential token and I can place it here. And when I want to move it, I can move it and it's in my control.
So we can see it's like real-time polling.
Real-time polling, real-time, honest, direct polling.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm still trying to just wrap my head around it a little bit. More so just from the, like, let's say I live in, Nigeria. They've got, big crypto adoption happening right now. This sounds like this sounds great, like they might be able to get a little bit of extra cash just for existing. If they're getting 1 UBI an hour, and they want to translate that into we might have covered this, so apologies if we have, but if they want to turn that into things that they can do in the world, the market would determine the rate. So 1 hour, so that one UBI might be worth $5 US,
That's
or it
right.
might be worth whatever. And so the market determines that rate, markets do, and they convert that, and maybe at $5 after transaction fees, they get $4 US for that 1 hour, right? That's the general idea. So why would the market, like if I'm an investor, um, why would I want to buy into the UBI? Like, is it because I like what's the yeah? Why? How does the market rate kind of get determined here? I'm not too. I don't know too much about finance, and I'm just trying to see how that market rate could be determined, and why would people buy into it? Other than believing in the like, I gave the money because I was like, whatever Democracy Earth is doing, I support it. So there's my money, right? But not everyone's going to be like me, and aligning financial incentives is very powerful, as we know. So what's the connection there? How does that happen? And forgive me if you've explained this to me, but I'm just trying to really try to understand it.
Yeah. So first of all, adoption does take time. And so we're not trying to rush anything. As a matter of fact, the opposite. We actually put throttles into the protocol. So literally over the first 40 days, we couldn't have more than 60,000 people sign up, right? And because we know it takes time, we know underlying protocols needed to be developed, lower transaction costs, things like that, and different use cases, will need to be developed for the identification. And as more and more people, as we've seen in most, token issuance, once you get a community that believes in it and they start using it, Doge, for example, right? That's just a dog in a picture and belief, right? And so it's, when you have utility underneath it, like voting and real applications, it's going to have real use and demand for the token. And so that's one thing that supports it, is that voting utility under the token.
Yeah.
As well as a unique sort of notion relative to valuing time. And we think that, again, once that gets learned out there, people will, okay, I shouldn't let this go for less than I would sell my time for. That takes a while for people to really understand. I mean, it's taken us a lot of back and forth just to sort of get your hands around it. And it's tough. I know that, fiat currencies or any currency is hard to understand, but if you look back over time, like they change all the time, they're added all the time. Every time you add a new like credit card to your digital wallet, it's a whole new currency, if you will. Like airlines were a new currency, airline miles, right? I mean, and they're created just from nothing, sitting your butt from here to there, no productivity, nothing, right? All of a sudden there's a new currency out there. You used to buy it with dollars and now you buy it with airline miles, right? And the proof is just, hey, did you go from here to there? Yes. Oh, here you go. New currency's created. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And so that sort of adoption took a long time. People, when those were first issued, like, what are these? And how are they different? And, more and more, there's going to be all those different layers of currency and use. And so we just think that, we're going to continue to build those protocols, and the markets are going to continue to develop and put value on it. And we're going to continue to build more things on top of the identification. But in general, it's just important that we thought that those limiting factors are there. So it's not just unlimited quantity. There's a process there that's going to throttle that pace and growth. So it just isn't overloaded with bots and symbols. And so, with that, we want a managed growth that sort of adopts and tracks both to the underlying technologies. I mean, if you think about Democracy Earth, a lot of people are like, what's taking you guys so long? And you really just have to wait for like smart contract auditing, things like that to come along, transaction costs to come down. There's, just a lot of development that you sort of track to and prioritize. So it's a long game for us. It's not that next year we expect everyone to understand it and get it. It's going to, spread out there. So we have a long time horizon here, and we're relatively confident in our protocol. And the key and trick always is trying to keep it as simple as possible. And there's a lot of complicated stuff out there. So, 1 per hour and just prove your humanity and keep it a simple voucher process is as simple as we could get.
Yeah. and I could pay you for your time. Like, thank you for sitting here for 2 hours. Here's two UBI. Or would I like
Yeah,
that? That's
yeah, exactly, right. And you could take them out of your wallet, or you could buy them out on an exchange, or you could just, if you will, the protocol is to send me the equivalent, and that'll mint one in my wallet, because I'm basically saying I'm selling an hour of my time, and then I can't mint more than a certain amount in a given day.
yeah. Okay. So if so, so if your time's more valuable than mine, you've
Yeah,
got this extra, you've got all this extra experience. So you might not
yep.
want the market rate of that one UBI, right? Oh, but it's all times the
Oh,
same.
I definitely
So
won't. I might definitely not. So let's say I'm doing consulting for you, right? Now we're going to come up to an agreement. Now I've paid plenty of lawyers $500, $600, $700 an hour, and I got nothing at the end of the day, right? So how much was their time worth? Nothing, right? The idea is that you're actually, for anything that takes time to do, and sometimes things don't take much time at all, but you are contracting with that person through a smart contract and basically at least paying them a market rate for their time. Now, if I think, well, okay, yeah, that pays me for my time, you've contracted for that, but the service I'm providing to you, the delivery I'm providing to you, that's worth a lot more than just my time. There's plenty of jobs that aren't. Just do a mindless thing, and I'm paying for your time, and there's the market rate, and I've got your time, and it takes no skills, right? There are plenty of others where, well, if it takes skills, then something else is going to be delivered over that time than just you sitting there, right? So you start to have different conversations. Deliverables actually become what are becoming valued. Um, but underneath that, at least you have the record that this person bought your time and paid a fair market rate for it.
Mhm. Okay.
Right. And then the conversation can be anything on top of that: sales related, expertise related, any sort of deliverable. Or it can just be, I'm paying you 2 per hour, right? I'm just not paying you less than 1. Right.
Yeah. So you could actually choose to pay someone however much you want, and you can buy those UBI tokens however you want, and then send them through. Um, is the intention for this UBI token to become a currency, like a global currency, like the primary means of exchange, or is it separate? Is it meant to be kind of something more underlying that feeds into what could be a global currency of the future? Which who knows what it'll be? It might yet to be created. Um, yeah, I'm curious to hear your answer.
Yeah. So first of all, the answer is yes. And yes, because whenever you issue a blockchain token, it's global. And oftentimes, it depends on how you define currency and where you are and what regulation.
Mm.
But usually the token has some value. So is that a currency? The lines are pretty blurred, right? Especially as you can swap in and out of these tokens and you have ultimate liquidity. And in some places, they like to call it a currency. In other places, they know it's an asset. But then when it's an asset's liquid, is that not a currency? So, um, you know, again, it's not meant to like compete with, existing. I would consider it more like a missing layer. And I think there's room for hundreds, if not thousands. Again, you think of airline miles, there's a currency. Is that competing against a dollar? Absolutely. You used to buy airline miles with dollars. Now you can actually not buy them with dollars and use airline miles. It's a competing currency with the dollar in that category. And we're going to have hundreds, if not thousands of those. And this happens to be, yes, a missing layer that scales with humanity and represents time. Now, we've seen a lot of time based token, projects out there, and there's a lot of merit to that thinking. But I think that it wasn't until UBI and this protocol that, it sort of hit the mark on what's needed out there. And that's a very simple protocol that scales with humanity and represents time itself. And, will there be, other layers that represent different currencies? Yes, absolutely. Hundreds of them, thousands of them.
Yeah. Well, it sounds very exciting. I'm listed. I've attempted to prove my humanity, so I'm in no rush to get my stream. Don't worry. But I'm excited to see how this unfolds. Um, what are the we can take a bit of a break there. I think we've covered at least what I wanted to ask with regards to the UBI. But what are the biggest challenges in moving this new raft of technologies forward? I spoke to a guy called Jason Potts the other day. He's an innovation economist and a blockchain economist. He's based in Melbourne. And he said that blockchain is going to basically underpin all of the social infrastructure of the future, like the digital social infrastructure, which is just huge, right? And that's the feeling that you get if you're on Twitter, if you're just listening to these things, and if you've just got a bit of an imagination, you can see how it applies in so many different ways. So it's got this amazing potential. What are the barriers to adoption, or barriers for democracy Earth? Like, what are you finding? What are you finding in the ecosystem? What's being said?
Yeah, yeah. Adoptions are always in the most important ones in my world are timing. You have to get your timing right. If you're too early, you get killed. If you're too late, you get run over. And and timing is one of those things it's tricky to ride that timing wave properly. You run out of cash, or you can do so many things as a startup, which we certainly are, and in an industry that's really early. But it's regulation is a big one. The friction that's caused by governments as you're operating on a global internet, and commerce wants to move globally as well. And more the younger generations, think of themselves as global citizens and don't relate to the borders and obstacles that are created by currency. So, and there's certain pride there in currencies as well that exists, the US dollar or whatever currency, and which is, again, a generational thing, I think. And, just we see friction there. So that's sort of some obstacles. General blockchain understanding. I mean, I think you've got a couple of major worlds there. One is sort of finance related, and they just think of blockchains as making money and buying low and selling high, and driving the price up. And I understand that world in the finance world, and that we certainly need market, making in all these different tokens, and that only happens when you have a rich marketplace and supply and demand, and let it operate and not tinker with it too much. But it also creates an opportunity because things are so open for a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of trolls out there, and a lot of people that don't understand your protocol or why you issued it. They start bad mouthing you. So, there's a lot of obstacles and misunderstanding out there. So it's an education process that takes time.
Yeah, I've noticed that now. I've been following blockchain for a while. I tried to buy it in 2013. It was way too hard, and I just gave up. Right. And I still feel that when I go to a website for a crypto project, and I'm just hit with all of this jargon, and I don't know what it does. I've really got to I've got to do a lot of research just to be able to understand the basics. And I think this is true if this is true for me, I'm somewhat technologically clued in. Like, how is my mum going to use this, or my grandma, or how are they going to not only use it, but kind of understand how this fits into the bigger picture, and understand why their data is important and how these things enable it. I think that's one of the biggest not drawbacks, but it's one of the biggest failures, let's say, of the space at the moment, not being able to communicate the true value, like the world changing, utopian vision in a way of what this technology, or the set of technologies, presents us with.
Well, yes, and in the industry, if it were just didn't face the headwinds, and I think those headwinds are both regulatory, but also existing power structures and currencies, right? If you're kind of an institution and blockchain's going to run your business model over, you're going to spend every amount of your existing currency against it. And a lot of those organizations own the media and do just that. And, or if you've got a currency that is going down relative to a lot of these, blockchain currencies, again, you're gonna fight against it. And again, so much of this is dark money and sits in ledgers that aren't public. And I think there's a lot of fear there from those folks that try to stop blockchains from advancing. So those headwinds are there, and
So
recognize.
just to make sure I understand, there's dark money, so money that's been made in dodgy ways that's sitting in ledgers, and they don't want those advancements to take place because they'll be under scrutiny. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if you think about crime around the world, what currency is used for crime?
I'll say US
Just
dollars
off
with
the
Bitcoin
top of
now.
there you go. And let me just say, is that going through the banking system or is that cash?
Cash.
Oh, bingo. Right.
Yeah.
So, bingo. So the US dollar is used around the world as for the criminal systems, and it's mostly dark. Meaning it's not registering on the banking system. It's being, in duffel bags. It basically runs the criminal system of the world. And more and more, it's digitized, and that cash is not of value and not used, the harder it is for the criminals to get away with their crimes, actually, right? Now, but it's really more of, the crime is one thing, and that's more of a cash flow situation. But the dark money is more of that money that's sitting there and had been inherited and basically is in the trillions of dollars in the hands of a few, and it influences so much, right? And so don't think about it as criminal, just think of it as so massive that it's got an outweighed voice, right? So, and it speaks in very different ways, right? That, again, it's dark. You don't see it. You don't see where it comes from. And it's so massive that, there's talk, and then that, dark money speaks. And so I think that anyone that is in that world sees their power slipping away relative to cryptocurrencies and legitimate ledgers, I'd call them, of power.
Because it's a lot easier to influence, a handful of politicians with, if you've got money, or there are plenty of ways to do it. It's far easier to do that than to try to completely alter a protocol that's running on, a million computers around the world.
Yeah. And the money that flows into these political campaigns and politicians is, from these super PACs, and it's very, very difficult to find its source. And at the end of the day, it has just as much or more voice and power than citizens, right? And it's just money, right? And it's just coming from a very few that you can't determine who it is. So when you think about, is this democracy? Well, it's certainly a form of capitalistic democracy. And most of the numbers I see, would indicate that over time that power has shifted. And today we've sort of crossed that Rubicon where more of the power is in the corporations and the institutions than it is with the people. And that's a dangerous place to be. Very dangerous place to be.
Particularly when their interests are not at all aligned with our own, at least from the... I think in many countries in the West, at least, we are pro-climate change, we are pro-climate action, pro-taking the necessary steps, but that just does not translate into the decisions at the higher levels. And at what cost? Well, potentially the collapse of the biosphere and our societies with it.
The measurements are wrong, right? If you think of how a corporation's measured, it's stock price, right? And stock prices, because they're mandated to report every quarter certain numbers, and those numbers are all just profit related. And they're not, how much carbon did you use? They're not, are your employees satisfied and paid well? It's not, not all the things that might or should go into the value of a corporation, right? And so we're just missing a lot of these measurements. And the good news is that blockchains are going to be able to be implemented to put in place these measurements. right? And
Yeah.
put the proper value on corporations, or, let's call it a collection of activities people are doing, right? And rooting out a lot of these layers and layers of, limited liability in these corporations. I mean, if you go back in history, when corporations were, at least here in the United States again, first allowed, the states would allow them under one condition, that the owners were liable. And the idea of limited liability was the very last thing, and exactly what the states were trying to prevent. And over time, it's just been chipped away such that it became the reason to start a corporation is limit your liability. When it started
That
out,
was what
well,
I
of
learned
course not.
at school.
We see the need to organize and get together, but what you can't do is off put the liability, right? And so just that notion alone is one that's going to kind of come home to roost, I think. And more liability is going to be accounted for because now you're accounting for it. Now you have the actual accounting. And one thing that I've learned is you can't have accountability without the accounting. As a matter of fact, I'll sort of mention a couple of books that I would recommend. And one of those is Architecture of a Techno Democracy. It was written by Jason Hanania, and essentially he's a lawyer, ex-FBI, whistleblower, ran for Senate here in California, 2016, and wrote this book saying that it's not until blockchains came along that we can have real democracy here in the United States. And it wasn't until I read that book that we started thinking of the U.S. as a customer for Democracy Earth, that, oh yeah, democracy is a little broken here. And he pointed out that as a nation, we've kind of gone from the rule of one, which is the king, to a rule of the 1%. And now we can transition to a rule of the 100%, not 99%, but 100%. So we go from king 1 to 1% to 100%. And we can only get to the 100% if we do 4 things. And that's CODA: communications, options, decisions, and accountability. And that's democracy. So what that means is communications, we have to, whatever we're conducting democracy on, the people need to own those communications. And the truth of the matter is they don't. Facebook owns those communications. Google owns those communications. Private enterprises own those communications. So we don't have democracy today because the communications on which we conduct democracy aren't owned by the people, right? I would say, congratulations, Mark Zuckerberg. You've created utility. Now hand it over to the people, right? Now, the second one in CODA in this book is options. And that's where it has to be an easy process for people to put options out there. Not a complicated process, not a complicated ballot process, but ideas can flourish. The options can come very easily. The third thing is decision making. And that's where voting comes in. Okay, we've had a communication. We've decided what options we want. Now we're going to vote on them. And the real problem with democracy today in most places is it doesn't have the last thing, the A, the accountability. It's not being measured. We voted on it, and why wasn't it ever implemented, right? And we don't have that sort of last element. And Jason told me that now he's writing a new book, the second book, that is going to focus right on the A of CODA, accountability. And so it's with that and his connecting sort of things to the Second Amendment and Fifth Amendment that we sort of look at the U.S. as sort of in need of what Democracy Earth was doing.
So do you build the underlying infrastructure? So just going on that CODA description there, the communication and the options. Is there underlying architecture upon which I could build my own voting app that's built on Democracy Earth? Is that so? You're building the base layer?
Yes, absolutely, and that's the way open source software works, and that's the way it works. You can go out to GitHub, fork our code, and build your own democracy on top of our platform.
Yeah,
sure.
And that could be for corporations, anything, whatever I want. It could be my state government. It could be a country.
Anything you want. Anything you want. You have a group of people that you want to vote on something. You want to distribute those votes or tokens, and you want to conduct it in different ways. Yes.
So people built like I'd love if I could just like take that code and then there's like a shell of an app that I could throw it into and then do it for my let's say my local government for just as an example. If I could just pull that in, if there's a few hackers locally who could just do that and then try to bring it, get some adoption, throw it on the app store or something. I don't know what the technical details would be. Like, is that sort of technical infrastructure or that modularity that it has the work been done so that people can grab it and grab and go?
Uh, yes and no, and in different ways. There's a group out of Paris that really has built their entire company around it, and what they do is they're kind of like the Red Hat to Linux, right? Like the code is there, and depending on what the jurisdiction or the country or the county wants to do, they would hire them to implement our software and kind of do it on their behalf, right? In some
Yeah.
jurisdictions, they're pretty technical and they do it themselves, but in most times, you're going to be hiring somebody that's implemented it multiple times, can host it in an appropriate way, and whatnot.
Yeah, great. I'm just imagining like I go to Democracy Earth slash I don't know modules, and there's like the high school club module. There's the or like packages, and it'll be just for all these different instances where you can tweak a few variables and make it fit what you need, but it's all built on this underlying technology. Uh, I think that'd be
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah, that's a good vision, and hopefully we'll absolutely get there, and we will. And once you fundamentally understand, kind of like if you have a token, that's sort of the fundamental model that you're building on, and then anyone can spin up a token and then distribute those tokens on whatever protocol they determine, right? Like
Mm.
what determines membership, right? And usually that's when you start a company, that's that's basically the fundamentals of what they call bylaws, right? Who starts out with shares? What's the voting process? What is quorum? How many votes? Is it simple majority or higher, super majority? And sort of, what are those just basic fundamentals? And it's once you kind of decide those or determine those, there's your governance, right? There's your tokens, and sort of, and we sort of created that governance layer, whereby anybody could do that again with our token, their own, spinning up a new one and developing those types of protocols. With again with some judicial process around it if there's any disputes.
Yeah. On the roadmap, is there the equivalent of login with Facebook, login with Google, but login with proof of humanity? Like, I'd love to just be able to not go through Google and then just click proof of humanity and have some identity verification thing happen there. And so I kind of control it in a way.
Yeah, and that triangulation is going to occur through your Ethereum address and your proof of humanity ID and other things that could be related or associated to it. But it does become a proof of stake condition, right? That you can prove like you have control of that ID, you get the rights that are associated with that. So yes, fundamentally, it does become your ID, controlled by your digital wallet, and then people can see, Keybase. If you use Keybase at all,
Yeah.
similar process where on
Keybase is like just for those who are unaware, it's, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't had a look at it in a while, but it's basically like an identity system, but there's also a chat and a file storage system. So it's like a bunch of different use cases bundled into one, but what holds it together is identity.
Yeah, exactly. And again, what holds the identity together is the simple public address on a blockchain, right? And so what they did is they layered on top of that, associated with that core basic ID, chat, files, and sort of some other functionality around it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the basis of the ID is again a digital public address.
Yeah. So I know that UBI is kind of just launched and it's early days. But aside from, I mean, I think UBI will definitely be one of the answers here. But aside from that, what's currently exciting you and the team? What's been going on in the world that has kind of really been animating you?
Well, 2020, what a year, right? I mean, and what was, it was such a transition year, but it was a tremendously important year in so many different ways. Obviously, in democracy, transitioning out of Trump and into a new president, no matter who that was one of the big excitements of the year. But probably for us is really what happened is UBI was forced on the United States of America. And essentially, if you look at what the United States did, they just, in a couple of rounds now, just gave every citizen in the United States a big check and said, here, you need this because the economy's not functioning properly and everyone ran out of money. And, it's another argument. Like if you look back in history at any sort of financial crisis or situation, it's always running out of money. In the Depression, the banks ran out of money and that caused a lot of troubles. And right now, I would argue that people have run out of money and it's caused a lot of problems. You don't have functioning systems. So the great thing that we're excited about is this pandemic forced the issue. And now the United States is actually participating in universal basic income and giving money directly to every single citizen.
Yep.
Now, they're doing it wrong. They're means testing a little bit and they're screwing it up here and there. But the point is, and certainly with Andrew Yang's, presidential campaign, he made the awareness much higher. And we're starting to people are kind of going, like maybe this is a good idea. And it's more than just what it used to be thought of as a social program or a substitute for social programs, but it's actually necessary for functioning economies. And it's a dividend we're all owed and due and just isn't distributed properly. And so this is kind of what we're excited about, certainly relative to 2020 and sort of the crazy dynamics that it created out there. And, before that, we didn't even think that was going to be, we thought that the time horizon was actually going to be longer than it has turned out.
We were talking about what's exciting you guys at the moment, or what's exciting you, and that was basically the changes that we've seen in the US, the pandemic, the change of presidency, the general fact that universal basic income has become more mainstream because everyone's gotten a payment. Everyone in the US had a direct payment from the government, and they know that it's possible. So if you just want to continue from where we were, or if that summarizes it reasonably well, we can move on.
Yeah. That combined with, another group that I've been involved with is Independent National Union. And this is something that it's, again, trying to improve the democratic process, but doing so with independent candidates and helping independent candidates get on the ballot. So this is another thing that's excited me. We haven't announced too much stuff publicly yet. We've got some big financial backers. And the idea is that, there's a great book recently written called The Politics Industry. And when you're in democracy and you work in the technology to support, an industry, it's nice to see books like this coming out from business people. And this was written by Catherine Gall and Michael Porter. And Michael Porter is a big time business author. And essentially they looked at politics as an industry and said, what's wrong with this industry? And essentially what they came up with was, two main takeaways, is that the primaries have to be open. And over the years, they become more and more closed. And they should result in 5 candidates in open primaries that go on to the general election where it's ranked choice voting. And that 2 steps alone would improve the democratic process here in the United States and improve things tremendously. Unfortunately, political parties over the years have chipped away at that, closed the primaries more and more, and essentially the primaries become the general election. Because if you're in a blue state or a red state, it's all those candidates vying for that Republican nomination or the Democratic nomination. Whoever that is gets elected, and there's no real election that occurs at the primary. And so, that's another thing that excites me, that states are starting to understand ranked choice voting. California is leading the way, Maine is, Vermont, a few other states, and that they're understanding that blockchains can be used and that you get better democracy if you have more open primaries, have ranked choice voting. And, this is another thing that excites me. And then more and more blockchains are going to be used to underpin and basically enable ranked choice voting in open primaries. We didn't talk about it, but my daughter actually ran for U.S. Congress this last cycle, and she ran against Nancy Pelosi. And so we got to see very, firsthand how the democratic process is stifled basically by shutting out, access to the ballot by in a lot of different other means. And so this is one area that, I'm supporting and pretty excited about.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really good to hear. And I was just thinking about the previous presidential election. It seemed, as an outsider, being in Australia and not really having paid too much attention to previous. I mean, I paid attention to basically the Trump elections. They were the big ones that were in my life, and just the way that the Democratic Party behaved. I mean, putting the Republicans aside, the way the DNC behaved, and it just seemed that there was a conspiracy against Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang especially, and what's the woman from Hawaii? She's great as well.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard, yeah.
Yes.
But I just remember seeing on CNN, they would just never put them on. They would give them no airtime. And I can't remember a lot of the details, but I just remember thinking, like, this is fishy. This is fishy. They don't tell you. It's not about who do you want to elect. It's like, out of the people that we select, who do you want to elect? And that didn't seem especially democratic to me. And maybe, there could be, I'm not too familiar with the DNC and what, how it all works, but there may be some good reasons why those sorts of things are necessary. However, to an outsider, it seemed a bit fishy, a bit dodgy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the democratic process is subverted. It's squashed a bit, and it's something we fight against for sure. And when you look at the election of Donald Trump, let's just touch on that for a second. There are a lot of party dynamics happening, and almost to the opposite degree. If you think about Donald Trump and how he got elected, he did it without any help of the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, when he had the help of the Republican Party going up against Biden, he lost. So if you think about what actually happened is, first of all, I'd argue that it was more of an economic decision than anything, not a political decision. I would also argue that people weren't voting for Trump. They just couldn't vote for Hillary. And when you have, again, just two candidates, this is the type of choice you get. And if you look at the way Trump came through the Republican primary, it was so fragmented, a dozen or 13 or 14 candidates, it only takes 10% of the vote to walk right through the middle. So that just takes a very radical, energized base. And I saw analysis by the New York Times where they said, in reality, if you had ranked choice voting in that Republican primary, Donald Trump would have gone from first place to last place. When you stack Donald Trump up against each individual candidate, every single time they preferred the other candidate. But when you stack Donald Trump's narrow, strong base up against the others, he only needed 10 or 11% to sort of beat them all. And so you could see how, wow, democracy actually fails unless you have some other, elements relative to more choice, free choice, and the elements to rank your choices relative to all the other candidates. And when you just end up with two candidates, you're left with a choice you don't like, and you end up voting for another candidate because you can't vote for the other one. So it's very hard to look at that election and say, well, look at all those people that voted for Trump. And I would say, well, I think more than half of those I couldn't vote for the other side, so I had to vote for this side. I'm not voting for him, I'm voting against the other side. And that's the polarity of so a lot of things that we've been doing is helping sort of that process be more open, be more ranked choice voting, give more choice, and open up the primary process.
Yeah, well, that's great. I had no idea that was the case. So the work that you're doing is very, very important in the US and but elsewhere with Democracy Earth. So just in the interest of time, if our listeners wanted to get involved, if they wanted to catch up with what Democracy Earth is up to and what you're up to, where would you direct them online? Where should people go to follow updates and to potentially get involved in whichever way they can?
Yeah, Democracy Earth has an active Twitter channel. You can reach me on Twitter at Herb Stevens. Email is herb@democracy.earth. And the app and protocol we just launched is proofofhumanity.id. And so you could find out all about the UBI token there at the Democracy Earth, democracy.earth website, or reach out to me directly.
Great. And if you were to give our listeners a parting message, something, if they could take one thing away, what do you think, what would you like to say? I might have put you on the spot a bit, but no pressure.
That's all right. I think that one fundamental principle that I'd like the listeners to take away is that time is equal. And I think we've enabled our currencies and economic systems to run their course and get that too much discrimination built into this currency. So I think with blockchains, with new currencies and new layers, we're going to see a lot of that discrimination and corruption eliminated. And so all you can support these protocols. And, I would argue that, the other thing is, like, when you look at blockchains as listeners, understand that there are two real industries. And the real reason Bitcoin was created was a social reason to solve real social problems that were created by private interests, namely banks and people that get in the way of people's money and accumulates in the wrong places. So the foundations of blockchains and Bitcoin itself were social in nature. And so I'd like your listeners, others, to really think about those use cases that matter to the world. And, there's a lot of us out there kind of fighting for getting corruption out of democracy and using blockchains in the right way, not just to make a little bit more money or flip a token or think about the short term. So be, like anything, judge the projects on the people and the protocols and over the long term and not just over the short term. At the same time, recognizing that, sure, blockchains are wonderful for monetary gains, as well as, I think, a huge movement of moving off of private registries like New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and over into public sphere. So that's kind of what I'd like to leave, is just like, as you look at blockchains, understand that difference and help support the initiatives, because a lot of the non-financial ones don't get the support and money and focus that they deserve. So
if people do want to support Democracy Earth, how can they do it? Can they send Ethereum to your address, US dollars?
Well, first of all, yes, we are a nonprofit organization, so we take donations. That's what we live off of. We have issued a token, and we do have a treasury there, if you will, but that takes support from the community. So the more you can support the protocols and our partners, Claros, as well, they're very important to the success here. So they have a token out there, PNK, and that's used for online judicial purposes. So, and I think in general, just, fight for democracy. One of the organizations that I respect a lot is the Human Rights Foundation, and they see that it's a technical solution a lot of the times, and that the social ills of the world, when you're thinking about humanity, a lot of them can and will be solved through technology, and very specifically with blockchains.
And technology, not just in the limited sense of, devices, but also social technologies, the way we orchestrate, the way we organize ourselves, our organizations, our governments, and of course the technologies that underpin them. And now that we have this wonderful opportunity to reimagine these things in such a way to ensure that these systems not only thrive, but do so in a way that benefits everyone.
Yeah, it benefits everyone and at least takes the corruption out, right? That's the minimum thing that we're doing. And that's the wonderful thing. It's a trust layer that does just that. And I think then, I think a lot of the ills of humanity in general are stress based, and stress is caused by not having control or being out of control. And that not being in control means you don't have control of your assets and your future. And I think that when you look at our systems, none of us have the keys to our stuff, right? And none of us really have control of our assets and our money. And so that causes a lot of stress on society, and stress causes health problems and worry and a lot of other things. So I really do see blockchains as, improving a lot of this, taking a lot of that stress off, and creating the layer of trust now that we can start building, better systems on top of.
Yeah, well, Herb, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure being here.